It was a late afternoon at Logan International Airport in Boston. The usual bustle of passengers heading to their flights, the ringing of departure announcements, and the scent of overpriced coffee filled the air. I had just finished my last meeting of the day and was looking forward to getting back to New York. The flight was smooth, or at least it should have been. I walked up to the gate counter with my carry-on, barely noticing the flight attendant, a woman in her early 30s, behind the desk. She gave me a polite but detached smile as she scanned my boarding pass. Then came the unexpected. "Excuse me, Miss Leavitt," she said, suddenly very cold. "I'm afraid you won't be able to board this flight." I raised an eyebrow, stunned. "What do you mean? There must be some mistake. My ticket is all set." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "We don't allow individuals like you to fly on this airline." Confusion set in, and I glanced around, noticing that a few other passengers had started to pay attention to the scene. "Individuals like me?" I repeated, unsure whether this was some kind of strange misunderstanding or an outright attack. Her lips curled into a thin smile. "You're a right-wing political figure, aren't you?" I froze, my mind racing. I had been in politics for years, yes, but what did that have to do with anything? I had never experienced something like this, especially not in public, especially not with the airline I had flown countless times before. "I don't see how my political beliefs are relevant here," I said, my voice a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "I paid for my ticket, I have my ID, and there's absolutely no reason for you to deny me boarding." The attendant didn't back down. "We've been instructed not to allow people like you on our flights." For a moment, I stood there, utterly dumbfounded. This couldn't be happening. My mind flashed back to the heated discussions I'd had in recent weeks, the speeches I'd delivered, and the interviews where I voiced my opinions. Was this retaliation? Was I being singled out because of my political stance? Before I could respond, another voice interrupted. A man in a dark suit appeared beside the counter, his expression one of stern professionalism. "Is there a problem here?" The attendant quickly turned toward him, still maintaining a condescending tone. "Yes, this woman is a conservative political figure. I don't think she should be allowed on the plane." The man glanced at me, his face unreadable. "Let's step aside for a moment, Miss Leavitt. I'll take care of this." I followed him to the side, trying to suppress the anger rising in me. How was this even legal? What kind of person made decisions about who could fly based on political ideology? "Are you going to do something about this?" I asked, my voice sharp. The man's demeanor softened slightly. "Don't worry, Miss Leavitt. I'm going to speak with the flight crew about this issue. In the meantime, please remain here." He turned to address the flight attendant. The minutes stretched on as I stood there, feeling my blood pressure rise. I couldn't shake the disbelief. I had flown countless times without a hitch, and now, over a simple political disagreement, I was being singled out. It didn't make sense. But I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something more was going on here. The man who had intervened was still talking to the flight attendant. Their voices were low, but I could hear the sharpness in his tone. From the snippets of their conversation, I pieced together what was happening. Apparently, the airline had a no-conservative policy in place, quietly passed down through the ranks, aimed at preventing certain people from flying, a policy that no one in the public eye was supposed to know about, let alone confront. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. This was worse than I thought. This wasn't just discrimination, it was systemic, like something out of a dystopian novel, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Then the man finally turned back to me, his face impassive. "Miss Leavitt, I apologize for the inconvenience. We are removing your name from the restricted list. Please proceed to board." My relief was short-lived. As I reached for my bag, the attendant suddenly spoke again, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "You can't just let her on this plane. She doesn't belong here. The man's expression didn't change. "This is over, and you are to stand down. Miss Leavitt is free to board, and you will not interfere." For a moment, the room fell silent. All eyes were on us. The flight attendant, who had been so confident just moments ago, looked like she was about to explode. She crossed her arms, glaring at me with the kind of intensity that made me feel uncomfortable. Then, to my surprise, the man's voice hardened. "In fact, I'm afraid you've made a grave mistake, and you'll be suspended pending an investigation into your behavior." Her face turned pale. "What? You can't be serious." "I am serious," he replied, his tone unwavering. "This is a violation of airline policy and, frankly, basic customer service. Your actions are not only discriminatory but also illegal. You'll be contacted by HR." The attendant stepped back, her hands shaking. She looked at me one last time, her eyes burning with animosity before turning and walking away. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The man, seemingly satisfied with the resolution, turned to me. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Miss Leavitt. I will ensure that no further issues arise during your flight." But just as I turned to board, the real shock came. The flight attendant, no longer in control, had stormed out of the gate area. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she disappeared down the hallway. As the last passenger boarding call echoed through the terminal, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I boarded the plane with a strange sense of relief, my heart still racing from the confrontation at the gate. The flight was uneventful, aside from the occasional uneasy glance from the flight attendants who didn't seem entirely comfortable with what had happened. But as the plane cruised through the sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, not just with the situation itself, but with the larger implications of what I had just experienced. When I finally landed in New York and turned on my phone, the notifications flooded in. News outlets, social media, everyone was talking about what had happened at Logan Airport. The story spread like wildfire, and the reactions were mixed. Some condemned the flight attendant's actions as blatant political discrimination, while others seemed to rally behind her, accusing me of stirring up trouble. I wasn't surprised by the outrage on either side. Political division had become so sharp in this country, it was as though people saw every issue through a lens of extreme polarization. But what struck me was the overwhelming support for the airline's swift response. The company had issued a statement almost immediately, condemning the flight attendant's actions and vowing to conduct an internal review. By the time I reached home, I was bombarded by calls, emails, and messages. The story had become a viral sensation, and my inbox was filled with everything from congratulations to death threats. It was as if the event had reignited the tensions that had been simmering in the country for years. But then, in the midst of all the chaos, something happened that no one had anticipated. The next morning, I woke up to a news alert that would send shockwaves through the media. The flight attendant who had denied me boarding was fired. The headline read like a vindication for me, but as I read through the article, I felt a strange sense of discomfort. Her name was Emily Thompson, a 30-something woman who had been working with the airline for over 5 years. She'd been well liked by her colleagues, but in the wake of this incident, everything had changed. Apparently, she had been reported to the company multiple times for similar incidents, subtle, but growing evidence that she harbored biases against certain passengers based on their political views. Her supervisors had received complaints, but nothing ever escalated until the scene at the gate. The airline, it seemed, had been turning a blind eye for months. Now, with her dismissal, Emily Thompson was thrust into the spotlight. Public opinion was divided. Some sympathized with her, arguing that she was merely expressing her beliefs in a moment of frustration. Others, of course, were furious, saying she had crossed a line. I couldn't help but feel a little conflicted. She had been unprofessional, yes. But was it worth it for her career to end over one moment? Did I feel responsible for her firing? Should I? And then, a message popped up on my phone. It was from a number I didn't recognize. You don't know what you've done. The text was short, chilling. I stared at the screen, my heart racing again. The message was unsigned, and there was no follow-up. But it made me uneasy. Had I stirred something up that I didn't fully understand? Was Emily Thompson just a scapegoat, or was there something deeper at play? The message hung in my mind like a dark cloud, unsettling and cryptic. I spent the rest of the day trying to brush it off, telling myself it was just some random person trying to stir up drama. But as the hours passed, the unease in my gut only grew. What had I truly uncovered with this incident? And why was it that the more I tried to ignore it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger at play? The following evening, I received another message. This one was even more alarming. You should have stayed quiet. This won't be over until you learn your lesson. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling slightly. The tone was unmistakable, this wasn't a joke. It wasn't some random troll. Whoever was sending these messages meant business. I didn't waste any time. I contacted the authorities, providing the texts and explaining the situation. The officer I spoke to was patient but didn't seem to take the matter as seriously as I felt it deserved. "We'll look into it," he assured me, but there was something about his tone that made me feel like I was being dismissed. I couldn't help but wonder if they truly understood the gravity of the situation. The next morning, things took an even darker turn. I was getting ready for a meeting when I received an alert from my home security system. There was movement outside my apartment. My heart skipped a beat as I watched the live feed. A man, dressed in a black hoodie, was standing just beyond the reach of my front door, his face obscured by the shadows. I froze, my mind racing. Was this connected to the messages? Was I being targeted? I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the figure was gone. They searched the area and found no sign of forced entry, but it didn't comfort me. The idea that someone had been watching me, had been so close to my doorstep, was terrifying. The days that followed only deepened the sense of dread. The threats continued, growing more ominous with each new message. "You're next," one said. "Don't think you're safe now, read another." The police still couldn't trace the number, and I began to realize just how powerless I was in this situation. I tried to continue with my daily life, but the weight of the threats became harder to ignore. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, shadows lurking just outside my vision. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, never fully able to relax. Every unfamiliar car parked too long in front of my building, every passing pedestrian, every unfamiliar voice made my pulse spike. Then, one evening, just as I thought the night might finally bring some peace, a familiar face appeared in my inbox, Emily Thompson. She had been quiet for days after her firing, but now she had reached out. The email was brief, almost cold, and yet there was something unsettling about it. "You don't know what's coming. You think this is over. You've made a mistake." I quickly scrolled through the rest of the email, but it was nothing but a string of threats, some personal, others veiled in sinister promises. But then I saw something that made my heart stop. It's not just me you need to worry about. There are others who think the same way I do, and they're already in motion. You're just the beginning. The message ended abruptly. No sign-off, no explanation. Just an eerie finality. At that moment, the reality of what I was facing hit me with full force. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's misguided actions. This was a warning. A warning that things were about to escalate. And I was the target. The weight of Emily Thompson's words hung over me like a storm cloud, darkening everything around me. You're just the beginning. What did she mean? Who were these others? And why was I suddenly the target of something so much larger than a simple political dispute at an airport? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew. The threats weren't just vague, they were pointed, personal. The fact that someone had been watching my apartment, that they seemed to know so much about my daily life, made it clear, this wasn't random. I started digging into Emily Thompson's background, hoping to find a clue, a connection. Her social media accounts had been taken down after her firing, but a few public records and online forums held the key. Emily had been active in local conservative circles, but nothing about her suggested the depths of obsession that were now emerging. That night, I couldn't sleep. The constant barrage of messages, the fear that someone was always watching, kept my mind racing. But then, as I scrolled through one last email, a subject line caught my attention: the network. The message was short but terrifying. "You have no idea who you're messing with. We know where you are, where you go, what you do. You're not safe." I slammed my phone down, my breath quickening. It was one thing to receive anonymous threats from people who didn't know me. It was another to be threatened by a network of people who had somehow infiltrated my life, who had been tracking my every move. I immediately reached out to the police again, but this time, I demanded more action. The officer I spoke with, Sergeant Miller, sounded more concerned than before, and he promised to escalate the matter. He informed me that they were working on tracing the messages, but he couldn't guarantee much. "We've seen things like this before," he said. "People think they're untouchable online. We'll get to the bottom of it." The hours that followed were agonizing. I stayed in constant contact with Miller, who seemed to be making progress. A trace on the messages had revealed that the phone number used to send the threats was unregistered, a burner phone that had been discarded after being used. They couldn't get much further with that. But what really scared me was the realization that whoever was behind this had set their sights on me long before the airport incident. Emily Thompson's firing was the trigger, but I had no idea who had been pulling the strings all along. The next morning, as I was getting ready for another stressful day, I noticed something strange. My front door was slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached cautiously, but when I pushed it open, everything appeared normal inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that someone had been inside. Except, there was a letter on the kitchen table. I walked over, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, neat, almost clinical. "You should have stayed silent. Your mistake is now everyone's problem." There was no signature, no further explanation, just the chilling words that seemed to confirm my worst fears: this was bigger than I could have imagined. Whoever they were, they had no intention of letting me walk away from this. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. Every person I spoke to, every conversation I had, felt like it could be a part of the conspiracy, a piece in a game I didn't understand. And then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I picked it up, my hands sweating. "Miss Leavitt," a calm, familiar voice said. "It's Sergeant Miller. You need to come down to the station. We need to talk. And bring the letter." The finality in his voice made my stomach drop. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever came next. The ride to the police station felt endless, each passing minute stretching out in slow motion. My heart was pounding in my chest as I clutched the letter in my hands, the weight of it growing heavier with every thought. What had Sergeant Miller uncovered? What was waiting for me when I walked into that station? When I arrived, Sergeant Miller was waiting for me in the lobby, his face serious, his eyes shadowed with a sense of urgency. "Come with me," he said without offering any small talk. I followed him down a narrow hallway and into a small interrogation room. It felt cold, sterile, like everything had been wiped clean of emotion. I sat down across from him, my palms still damp from nerves. I handed him the letter, watching his eyes scan the words quickly. He leaned back, folding his arms. "You were right to be worried. We've been looking into this, and it's not just a handful of disgruntled employees. This goes deeper. Much deeper." I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "What do you mean? Who's behind this?" Miller sighed, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "It's a group. They've been quietly infiltrating various organizations, from airlines to political campaigns, and they've been targeting people like you for a while. You became a target when you spoke out, and Emily Thompson was just the first pawn in their game. Wait, I interrupted, my mind racing. So she wasn't just some rogue employee. She was part of this group. Exactly, Miller confirmed, his voice grim. Emily wasn't acting alone. She was recruited, manipulated. They've been monitoring high-profile conservatives for months, using people in key positions to send a message. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. But why me? What do they want? Miller paused, clearly uncomfortable. They don't just want to silence you, Miss Leavitt. They want to send a message to the rest of your circle. The message is clear: if you don't conform to their ideals, if you speak out, you'll face consequences, both personal and professional. I stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. So, the threats, the surveillance, the letter, it was all part of their plan to intimidate me? Yes. And it's not just you. You're one of many. We've found signs of this group in other cities, targeting people in power, undermining political figures they don't agree with. He shook his head. This isn't about ideology anymore. It's about control. And they will stop at nothing to keep it. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a full-scale operation. And now I was caught in the middle of it. But, what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Miller's face softened, but the weight of the situation was still there. We'll be monitoring the group more closely. We're already tracking their digital footprint, but it's going to take time to uncover their full network. In the meantime, you need to stay vigilant. Don't trust anyone you don't know. Just as I was about to ask more questions, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Another anonymous message. You can't run forever. We always get what we want. I showed Miller the message, and his jaw tightened. We'll find them, Miss Leavitt. But for now, lay low. You're not alone in this, but we need your cooperation. As I left the station, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to settle over me. The threats, the stalking, the feeling of being watched, it wasn't over. But the truth had come to light, and now, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control again. The fear wasn't gone, but now I had the knowledge I needed to fight back. I wouldn't let them win. In the end, the battle for freedom wasn't just about politics, it was about taking a stand against the forces that sought to control and intimidate. And as for Emily Thompson, she wasn't the end of the story. She was just the beginning.